This is my family of koi swordtails. There's one male and two females and a whole bunch of their children, and as you can see, these fish don't breed true, so the fry come in a wide variety of colors and patterns, which is one of the things that I love the most about these beautiful fish. There are baby swordtails that are like their parents, with orange, black, and white markings. There's also fish that have none of those colors and are just plain gray. There are also babies that are orange and white, with no black at all. In fact, there seems to be no limit to the different variations of black, orange, and white markings that can show up in their young. Another cool thing about these fish is that their babies start getting their colors as soon as they're born, while guppies, for instance, take about 3 weeks before they start showing their colors. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows for these little swordtails, because some of them are born with a birth defect. Let's take a look. This little fish has a very big problem. He should have a tiny bubble of air right about here that allows him to float in the water. Without that little bubble of air, this baby swordtail sinks to the bottom of the tank like a rock every time he stops moving his fins. So it's very difficult for this little fish to swim, and when he does try to swim, he gets tired very quickly. So he spends a lot of time resting on the plant leaves or on the substrate. These fish with the defective swim bladders are sometimes referred to as belly sliders, and I think that the reason for the name is fairly obvious. Nonetheless, it's important to note that this problem is not exclusive to baby swordtails, because I've seen it in many different species, but in this specific breed of swordtail, it seems to be fairly common. These belly sliders can survive for several weeks, but they'll never live long enough to reproduce, so I'm not really concerned about them contributing their problem to the gene pool. And these little fish will often go unnoticed as they skip along the bottom of the aquarium searching for whatever tiny bits of food that they can find. I try to help them whenever I can by putting food near them to make sure that they have something to eat. Prepared food such as flakes or pellets work the best, because live food such as baby brine shrimp can be a real challenge for them to catch and eat. And my heart goes out to these little fish as I watch them struggle to keep up with their brothers and sisters. I first noticed the problem when I saw several baby swordtails resting on the leaves of a Brazilian pennywort. The leaves were near the surface where the fry tend to gather shortly after they're born. Here you can see 3 belly sliders resting on plant leaves near the surface, and 2 of them are about to have a territorial dispute over who is the rightful owner of this particular leaf. And this just goes to show you that aggression and territoriality can start at a very young age. And now we'll turn our attention to the baby swordtails that were lucky enough to have been born with a fully functioning swim bladder. As you can see, life is much easier when you live with a tiny bubble of air that keeps you from sinking to the bottom of the tank every time you stop swimming. Here you can see the baby swordtails hunting for a variety of tiny creatures that are often collectively known as infusoria. These tiny invertebrates grow naturally in the tank and provide a near constant food source for the baby fish. So they're always on the lookout for anything that moves and looks like it might be edible. And here we can see 2 different aquarium predators, both of which I've covered in earlier videos. Right here we have a few green hydra. And right over here, we also have a planaria. Both the planaria and the hydra tend to strike fear in the minds of many fish keepers, but they're both relatively harmless for the most part. The planaria poses no danger to the baby swordtails, but they will attack female shrimp that are carrying eggs, while the hydra have stinging tentacles that the little swordtails have learned to avoid. The baby swordtails have grown quickly, and they're much more colorful now, so that's nice. But the sand substrate in this tank is not as clean as it used to be, so I'll have to take care of that soon. Furthermore, the daily feedings of live baby brine shrimp and microworms have provided the hydra with lots of food, so their numbers have increased quite a bit. The swordtail fry quickly learned to avoid the hydra, but I've also seen them steal baby brine shrimp right from the hydra's stinging tentacles. However, I'm saving that footage for a different video. The little swordtails spend a lot of time moving back and forth over the substrate looking for any tiny creatures that they can eat, and it seems like they're always hungry, so they're always on the move. And now it's time to talk about a second abnormality that I've noticed in these particular fish, but this one isn't as obvious as the swim bladder issue that we looked at earlier, because this problem takes some time to develop before it becomes really noticeable. So let's take a look at some older fish and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. This is a grow-out tank where I've been putting some of my baby koi swordtails, and most of these fish are in perfect condition, but there are a few that don't have the normal streamlined body design that you typically see in a swordtail. Let's take a look at one of those fish right now. This fish has an abnormal shape and shouldn't be allowed to reproduce. I love the coloration, but there are plenty of other fish in this tank that are just as nice. So I'll have to figure out what to do with it, and we'll talk more about that later. Now we'll take a look at one more really obvious birth defect that I've found in these fish. This little fish has definitely been swimming in the shallow end of the gene pool, and his deformity is a bit more extreme than the last fish that we looked at. But in both cases, it appears to be a similar problem with a curvature in the spine. All right then, let's move on to a different subject. The male's gonopodium becomes very obvious long before they grow their sword, so the best way to sex these fish when they're young is by looking at the shape of their anal fin. Here you can see that this male is beginning to grow the characteristic sword-like extension on the tail fin that gives these fish their name. Both the sword and the gonopodium are two male traits that you can use to help sex these fish. However, some male swordtails are very slow to mature, so they can resemble females for a really long time before suddenly developing the characteristic gonopodium and sword-like tail. And those males that are slow to develop the typical male traits have led many fish keepers to swear that their fish have spontaneously changed their sex from female to male. But that's probably not the case at all. It's just that a male was slow to develop its typical male traits, so it was just assumed that it was a female. And that's why you rarely ever hear of a spontaneous sex change where it's the other way around, and a male swordtail suddenly turns into a female. So swordtails don't change their sex, which is not to say that it's impossible, because Mother Nature has a lot of tricks up her sleeve, but it's probably super rare and only happens in very specific circumstances, such as when a fish is injected with hormones or exposed to toxins that alter the reproductive system in ways that are completely unnatural. Nonetheless, if you'd like to speed up their growth rate as well as their final size, it's best to separate the males from the females as soon as you can, because the males use a lot of energy chasing the females around. And without the females there to distract them, that energy can then be diverted to rapid growth, a larger size at maturity, and a longer, more impressive sword. Another benefit of separating the sexes early on is that it gives me way more control over how quickly they reproduce, which is important because live bearers such as guppies, swordtails, and platies can multiply so fast that I'm sometimes overrun with too many babies and not enough space to keep them all. And according to my wife, I already have too many fish, which is completely ridiculous, I know, but I did marry her for better or for worse, so we're trying to work things out. We did go to see a marriage counselor, but there was a fish tank in his office, so it looks like that might be a win for me. Nonetheless, I have 2 females in the main breeding tank, and they take turns having babies, so there's an almost constant supply of new fry. And now I'm left wondering what to do with all of them, because according to Steve, the marriage counselor, I really can't keep them all. But if you've never kept koi swordtails, I highly recommend that you give them a try. They're easy to keep, and they're such beautiful fish. Yes, they don't breed true, but that's part of their charm, because with each new batch of babies you get something new, so there's a nearly endless variety of different colors and patterns in their offspring. Yeah, so what's happening now is I'm falling down the swordtail rabbit hole and setting up multiple tanks to grow out different males, because at the moment I only have one male with a fully developed sword. And once I can set up a tank with more than one mature male, I'll be able to film the dramatic sword fights between the males as they battle with each other for dominance. So I'm really looking forward to that, but while I wait, they'll keep breeding, I'll keep feeding, and there'll always be more babies. I'll bring most of them to a local pet store, and I could feed some of them to my bluegills. It would make for an interesting video, but I'm a bit too compassionate to seriously consider it. Hopefully this video, as well as the others I've made about these fish, will inspire you to consider getting some koi swordtails for yourself. They're such beautiful fish, and I don't think they get the attention that they deserve. In my opinion, they're much better looking fish than guppies, and they're healthier too because there's less of a problem with inbreeding. And swordtails also don't get that dreaded guppy wasting disease that ends up taking the lives of so many guppies. So go out and get yourself some koi swordtails. Put them in a planted tank with lots of cover for the babies, especially up near the surface, and then just wait for the magic to begin as they start breeding. And then bit by bit, your tank will begin to fill with dozens of beautiful baby fish, each one different from the next. And that does it for this video. Thanks for staying with me until the very end, and I really hope that you have a beautiful day.